सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर का मतलब है, नाम ही बता रहा है कि दैट पावर इज डिवाइडेड. SOP means separation of power. It means it is division of power between the organs of the government. सेपरेशन का मतलब ही है कि we used to divide the power. पावर का डिवीजन हो रहा है between the organs of the government. सवाल ये है कि हमने क्यों डिवाइड किया पावर्स बिटवीन. अभी आई बिलीव I must be audible and visible also. Why we have divided the powers between the organs of the government? क्योंकि अगर हम एक सिंगल इंसान को या सिंगल बॉडी को सारी पावर दे देंगे तो डोंट यू थिंक देयर विल बी द ग्रॉस मिसयूज ऑफ पावर और लोगों की राइट वायलेट होगी. तो दिस वाज द मेन आइडिया बिहाइंड द सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर. द मेन आइडिया व्हाई वी नीड in any system separation of power is that if we give whole of the power to single person or to body of person, अगर हम सारी पावर किसी एक इंसान में वेस्ट कर देंगे और विल गिव टू एनी बॉडी ऑफ ग्रुप, देन देयर इज अ ग्रेट चांस, हाई चांस दैट देयर विल बी ग्रॉस वायलेशन of the rights of the citizens. तो अगर हम सारी पावर किसी एक इंसान के अंदर वेस्ट कर देंगे या टू अ बॉडी ऑफ पर्सन, देन देयर इज अ हाई चांस कि दे विल मिसयूज द पावर. And whenever there is misuse of the power by a single person or by body of person, then there will be violation of the right of the public as a whole. So separation of power का मतलब it is such method by which we divide the power between three organs of the government. Separation of power is a method ये ऐसा मेथड है जिससे हम by which large amount of power that is which is there in the hands of individual or group that को we divide. जो भी पावर वेस्टेड है इन द हैंड्स ऑफ द सिंगल इंडिविजुअल और टू द ग्रुप ऑफ पर्सन, उसको हमने क्या किया, डिवीजन किया. वी हैव डिवाइडेड दैट पावर एंड वी हैव डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड between different organs of the government. This is the general meaning of separation of power. We all know that there are three organs of government: legislative, executive and judiciary. Separation of power का मतलब ये तीनों अपने इंडिविजुअल डायमेंशन में काम करेंगे. Their powers and functions will be totally different. There won't be any encroachment. अभी आगे चल के हम देखेंगे कि strict separation of power can never be possible, क्योंकि एक दूसरे से इंटरडिपेंडेंस इज रिक्वायर्ड फॉर वर्किंग ऑफ द सिस्टम. लेकिन सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर क्या बोलता है कि जो भी हमारे तीन ऑर्गन्स हैं, all the three organs of the government be it legislative, be it executive, be it judiciary, they too work in their independent sphere. With their respective function and powers. कहने का मतलब है कि ये जो तीनों ऑर्गन्स हैं, बीट लेजिस्लेटिव, एग्जीक्यूटिव और जुडिशरी, इनके बीच में क्लियर कट डिवीजन ऑफ पावर होगा, दैट को वी कॉल इट एज द सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर. तो जनरल मीनिंग आई बिलीव इज क्लियर टू यू ऑल. अब देखते हैं कि हु वाज द मेन पर्सन जिसका नाम सबसे ज्यादा एसोसिएटेड होता है विथ सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर. जैसे हमने देखा कि इवन दो इट वाज सर एडवर्ड कोक जिसने पहली बार रूल ऑफ लॉ वर्ड इस्तेमाल किया था, लेकिन किसने एक्सपेंशन दिया? एवी डाइसी. तो एवी डाइसी इज कंसिडर्ड एज वन ऑफ द मेन प्रोपाउंडर ऑफ द रूल ऑफ लॉ. सिमिलरली इट इज बैरन मॉन्टेस्क्यू जिसका नाम एसोसिएटेड होता है सबसे ज्यादा विद द डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ रूल ऑफ लॉ. इट इज French jurist Baron Montesquieu. He was the French jurist and he is such person जिसका नाम सबसे ज्यादा एसोसिएटेड है. He is most associated with the rule of, that is with the doctrine of separation of power. Because he has given very systematic and scientific approach to separation of power. वो क्या है अभी हम समझेंगे, लेकिन he was not the originator. जैसे एवी डाइसी was not the first person who has used the word rule of law. Similarly, Baron Montesquieu is not the person जिसने पहली बार इस्तेमाल किया सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर. इससे पहले भी अगर हम हिस्ट्री उठाकर देखें तो इन ग्रीक एरिस्टोटल in his book Politics has used that there are three forms of government, और in three forms of government में separation of power is there. Similarly in 17th and 18th century में English jurist John Locke and French jurist Jean Biden, they have also used the term separation of the power in their book Treatise of the Government. तो कहने का मतलब है he was not the first person who has used the concept of separation of power, लेकिन expansion इन्होंने ही दिया है. If we go back to the history, तो सबसे पहले we find that in Greece, especially in the Aristotle book, we find the mention of separation of power. And Aristotle book जिसमें हम separation of power का जिक्र पाते हैं, that is politics. In his books Politics, he has mentioned about the separation of power. According to him, there are three agencies of the government. Aristotle says that there are three agencies of the government. What are they? According to him, it could be deliberative. deliberative. Deliberative मतलब one who legislate the law. It could be executive. It could be executive discharging magisterial function. So he has said that deliberative hoga one of the agency, another will be magisterial, and next will be judiciary. So according to him, these are the three agencies of the government. Deliberative का मतलब है legislature से, rule making agency. Magisterial का मतलब है executive से, who implement the laws. और judiciary का मतलब है who used to interpret the laws and settle the dispute. तो इन हिज बुक्स पॉलिटिक्स एरिस्टोटल ने कहा है कि ये जो तीनों एजेंसियाज हैं, डेलिबरेटिव, मैजिस्टेरियल एंड जुडिशरी, इनके बीच में सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर होता है. Similarly, if we see subsequently in 16th and 17th century, following jurists have used, following philosophers have used the concept of separation of power. I believe ये लिख लिया आपने. Subsequently, हम देख रहे हैं कि origin क्या है separation of power का. Even though it is the jurist Baron Montesquieu who is associated, लेकिन history we can trace back in Greece, and if we see in 16th and 17th century, then following philosopher John Locke and Jean Buden Jean Biden is the French philosopher and John Locke was the British philosopher. They have conjointly written a book जिसका नाम था Two Treatises of the Government. In their book Two Treatises of the Government, they have mentioned about the separation of power. But ultimately, the scientific and systematic evolvement of rule was given by French jurist Baron Montesquieu. पहले इतना आप लिख लो, फिर आगे चलेंगे. I've written this. Now let us see what expansion Baron Montesquieu has given. क्यों हम इन्हें बोलते हैं? He is the man who is main associated with doctrine of separation of power. Baron Montesquieu, who was the French jurist, for the very first time, पहली बार, in year that is 1748, for the first time in 1748, he gave scientific and systematic approach or dimension to rule of separation of power. And in his book De Spirit des lois. What is the name of his book? It is The Spirit des. The name of his book is The Spirit des lois. The Spirit des lois फ्रेंच टर्म है जिसका मतलब होता है द स्पिरिट ऑफ लॉज. द स्पिरिट ऑफ लॉज. तो इन हिज बुक द स्पिरिट des lois, जिसका इंग्लिश वर्जन है द स्पिरिट ऑफ लॉज में, he had mentioned about the separation of power. और सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर को फ्रेंच में हम बोलते हैं des pouvoirs. He has described about des pouvoirs. des pouvoirs का मतलब होता है सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर. आपको एग्जाम में ये वर्क देकर पूछते हैं, जैसे ड्रॉइड एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव, कहाँ के एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को बोलते हैं? यस, तो दे गिव यू फ्रेंच और जर्मन टर्म इन द एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव लॉ इफ दैट इज कनेक्टेड विद द रूल, है ना. तो इन हिज बुक द स्पिरिट des lois, that is the spirit of laws, in year 1748 he has mentioned about the des pouvoirs, which means about the separation of power, and according to him no person or body, इनका क्या कहना है, no person or body should be vested no person or body should be vested with all types of power. एक इंसान में या एक बॉडी ऑफ पर्संस में हम सारी की सारी पावर को वेस्ट नहीं कर सकते. इट मीन्स वी नीड टू हैव सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर. एंड देयर आर 3 एस्पेक्ट्स ऑफ मॉन्टेस्क्यू थ्योरी. उस थ्योरी को देखने से पहले जितना मैंने पढ़ाया है आई विल टेल यू. प्लीज राइट. Right? If one person or an individual, if one person or an individual or group of persons or group of persons are vested with powers, they may misuse such power. Are vested with powers, then they may misuse such power, and there might be infringement of rights of the public at large if there is concentration of power. If there is concentration of power, so the very idea behind separation of power is that when a single person or group has got large number of powers, then it might become dangerous to the citizens. So, by the rule of separation of powers, we divide the power between different organs of the government, so that there is balance of power in the system. Change the paragraph. Separation of power is a method by which large amount of power in the hands of any individual or group is removed, making it more difficult to abuse. Change the paragraph. The history of separation of power can be traced back to Greece. Can be traced back to Greece when Aristotle book सिंगल कॉमा में लिखो बुक का नाम पॉलिटिक्स is referred according to him there are three agencies of the government. According to him, there are three agencies of the government, namely, first, the deliberative, second, the magisterial. Second, the magisterial. Third, the judicial. Third, the judicial. And there must be separation of power, and there must be separation of power between all three agencies, between all three agencies of the government, full stop. Subsequently, in 16th and 17th century, we find reference of separation of power in the work, single comma में आप लिखना, two treatises of government, 1689 by Jean Bodin, in bracket you write, French jurist by Jean Bodin, French jurist, and John Locke, in bracket English jurist, in bracket English jurist. Change the paragraph. But the name which is most associated with the doctrine of separation of power is of French jurist Baron Montesquieu, full stop. It was Montesquieu who for the first time discussed in detail and in extensive way the doctrine of separation of power. It is he who for the first time in 1748 gave a systematic and scientific formulation of the concept of separation of power. full stop. Montesquieu in his book, you write in French, the spirit des lois, single commas में, the spirit des lois, in bracket you write, the spirit of laws, it is written here. The spirit des lois, in bracket, the spirit of laws, has discussed this doctrine of, have discussed the doctrine of separation of powers, in bracket you write, des pouvoirs, this is the French term, des pouvoirs, DESPOUVOIRS, which means that no person or body should be vested, with all the three types of power, should be vested with all the three types of power.